One of the things that I hate about being a pastor is going to pastors' conferences because there we talk about how big our churches are. We talk about how many ministries we have. We talk about how many staff members or what our budgets are, what our Sunday morning attendance is. And quite honestly, all that I feel like it does for most of us is make us feel bad about ourselves, bad about our ministries, bad about what we're actually doing to advance the kingdom of God. And so then what that does for you and I is it makes us feel like if we could just get to average, if we could just stop feeling bad and just reach average, if I can just do as good as the guy down the street, if I can just build my church to the size of the church across town, if I can just get to the point where I don't feel bad about myself, if I can just reach average, then that'll be good enough. And quite honestly, good enough is not good enough. And that's what we're going to talk about today in today's podcast. Welcome to the Pastors Growing Church Community Podcast. So glad that you're here with me. Excited to be here with you for today's episode. And I'm going to talk about something that bothers me a whole bunch. But before we do that, I want to invite you to check out the Pastors Growing Church Community membership. Now, we are getting ready to launch that in the coming days, and I want you to seriously think about being a part of it. Now, there are lots of church growth memberships out there. There's lots of opportunities where you can spend your money and be a part of some sort of growth course or growth class or some growth tactic or some ministry model that you're going to steal from somebody else and they're going to teach you and you're going to see how it works for you. There's lots of those out there. This is not that. What this is going to be a community of pastors just like you from all across the country in all kinds of different churches. And the goal is for us to learn how to do ministry together by pulling the 4 levers of church growth. Now, as I've talked about in previous episodes, I'm not worried about church growth the way we normally think about that. And you'll hear about that in today's episode. But what I'm really concerned about is helping you as a pastor fulfill your calling and grow your church to whatever God has called you to, whether that's 50 people, 100 people, maybe it's 1,000 people, maybe it's 3,000 people. I have no idea. The number is irrelevant. What's really important is, are you fulfilling the calling that God has placed on your life in that location in your local church? And so the Pastors Growing Church Community Podcast is going to be focused on bringing pastors together, teaching you the 4 levers of church growth, but also helping you connect with other pastors who understand where you are, who understand what you're going through, who feel the problems that you feel Sunday in and Sunday out and week in and week out. And every day when you leave your office and you go home, they're carrying the same burdens and weight that you are, and they understand where you are. And they want to help just as much as you would like to help others. And I want to be there to help us all come together and see how we can grow our local churches. And so if you're interested, I want to invite you to be a part of the Pastors Growing Church Community membership. And you can go to brandonpartycooper.com/growing church, and you can sign up there. You can join the membership, and we're going to dive deep into the 4 levers of church growth. We're going to dive deep into understanding what it means to fulfill our own callings and what God has called us to do, regardless of what any other church or any other pastor is out there doing. I'm excited. I can't tell you how excited I am because I love connecting with pastors just like you. I love hearing your stories, hearing about your community, hearing what you're doing in your local church. And what we're going to do together is we're going to find a way to help churches across the country, your church, my church, the churches of everybody in the group, help us figure out how we can grow our churches without risking burnout to you and the other pastors who are in the community. Because that's just not the model that I believe Christ has given us. Jesus did not call us into ministry to burn us out and to spit us out on the back end. That's not who he is. That's not what he's called us to. And I believe that the Pastors Growing Church Community is going to put a stop to that for those who are part of it. So again, go to brandonpartycooper.com/growing church. Be a part of the community. Let's have some fun together. Let's dream, let's build, and let's do great things for the kingdom of God while also enjoying a lifestyle that isn't killing us, isn't burning us out, isn't filling us with anxiety and depression, but that's actually breathing life into us and giving us a fulfilled lifestyle that others can see and reflect Jesus through. So again, go to brandonpartycooper.com/growingchurch and let's get this thing started together. Okay, so I started talking about one of the things that I hate about being a pastor. Now, let me be clear. I love going to conferences. I love going to pastors' conferences. I love being a part of them. I love connecting with other pastors, hearing stories, finding out what God's doing in different parts of the country. I love it. However, the one thing I don't like about pastors' conferences, and whatever that looks like, whether that's a large gathering or whether that's a luncheon in your local area, whether that's this huge event where, speakers are coming in, whatever that is. What I don't like is the questions of how big's your church? Oh, what ministries are you launching this year? Oh, how is your online doing? Now, some of those questions are great because it's us just talking shop. It's us just having these questions. But when the pastors ask you, there are certain pastors who ask because they're looking to compare themselves to you. And I think what that does is, especially when they're larger churches or churches that are just bigger than us, or whether they're churches down the street maybe, and their church is 50 more people than your church is, and you always feel like you're trying to reach you're in the same community, you're reaching the same people, and yet they have 50 more people than you do, and you feel like you're always chasing that. There's this comparison, and I hate that. Because I think what it does for you and I as pastors is it cuts our legs out from under us. It makes us feel bad about the things that we're doing. It makes us get bad about the efforts that we're making. And it causes us to question ourselves. It causes us to lower our self-confidence. And it ultimately causes us to try to do things to rise up to whatever that level is that we're comparing ourselves to. And we do things that aren't necessarily what God has called us to do. And so I want to talk about how average is not good enough. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to feel bad about being average now. And I'm going to explain to you why I think we need to stop reaching for average and we need to reach for greatness. The first kind of idea or thought behind this is that when we are comparing ourselves to other pastors, or we're comparing our church to other churches, when we do that, ultimately what we're doing is we're saying, hey, I have this calling on my life. God has called me to be in ministry, to be a pastor, to pastor these people. He's called me to this location, this local church, this community. He's called me here to do this. And then what we do is when we look at other pastors or other churches and we say, oh, I wish that I was as big as that pastor. I wish that our church was that big. I wish I was doing those things. Or even now, more so, what we see online is we see these huge pastors, these great pastors who are leading these churches of thousands, and we compare ourselves to those pastors. And the problem with that is your calling is your calling. It's not another pastor's calling. It's not another person's calling. It's yours. And so what you're doing is you're comparing this calling that this other pastor has with your calling, and you're saying mine is subpar, mine is lesser. My question is if you're called to lead a church of 100 and another pastor is called to lead a church of 1,000, is he greater? Is she greater than you? Because it's only in our humanity that we look at the numbers and we compare bigger numbers to smaller numbers and we say, well, that's better than this. But that's not God's economy. That's not how God thinks. That's not how he's fashioned things. It's how we do. And I want to encourage you today because I think no matter where you are and what size of church is, no matter what you're doing in your ministries, you're doing what you feel like you can do. Now, can you do better? Possibly. But you can't start by comparing yourself to another church. You can't compare yourself to another pastor and say, well, that's the level, that's the bar, and that's what I'm working towards. What you need to start with is, what are you called to do? Are you called to lead whatever this church is or ministry is that you're involved in? Are you called to lead it to another level? Is God saying, hey, this thing that you have, I want it to be better by this much next year, or I want it to be more effective by next year or next month or next week or this next event that you're doing. I want you to reach this many people. And not that God cares about the numbers, but he does care about us growing and developing. And what we need to stop doing is stop comparing ourselves to other people or other churches or other pastors and start comparing ourselves today to ourselves yesterday. Am I better today than I was yesterday? Am I closer to Jesus today than I was yesterday? Am I reaching more people today than I was yesterday? Am I making a greater impact? Am I developing in my spiritual leadership? Am I developing in my knowledge of the scriptures? Am I spending more time today in prayer than I did yesterday? Am I growing to the best version of myself? Because that's really all that you need to do. You just need to be a better version of you today than you were yesterday, because that's growth. And that's what this whole process of sanctification looks like. You and I are called to be more like Jesus, not because we're pastors, but because we're disciples of Christ. We're called to be better today than we were yesterday. And that's really the measurement that we should focus on. And when we do that, when we focus on being better today than we were yesterday, then our eyes turn away from the ministry machine. All the things we have to do, the tasks and the items and the punch lists and the projects, we turn away from all those things and we turn our eyes back to Jesus. And we say, okay, Jesus, who do you want me to be today? What do you want me to do today? How do you want me to minister today? Who do you want me to call today or reach out to today? How do I be more like you today? Because isn't that ultimately what we are called to do? Is to be like Jesus. The Great Commission, go and make disciples. Well, you can't go and make disciples until you actually are a disciple. And if you are a disciple, if you're saying, hey, I'm spending my time with Jesus, I'm learning to be more like him, I'm growing in my likeness of who he is, I'm reflecting him to the world, then you are ready to disciple others. If you're called a pastor and you're called to lead a congregation, what you are called to do is to disciple other people the way Jesus discipled other people. And I'm not saying you need to disciple people in the exact format that Jesus did, although there's some merit there. It worked for him. Maybe we should consider that for us. But what I'm saying is that just as Jesus discipled other people, that was his focus, that was his main goal, that was what he spent his time and energies on, then shouldn't we be doing the same? Now, I get it. There are elements of church ministry, organizational management. There are parts of that. And quite honestly, some of those are the parts I love the most. I love doing the organizational management side of things. But what I've learned and what I've really become aware of in my own life in the last couple of years is that I have spent so much time focusing on the organizational management of things that I in some ways have forgotten how to pastor people well. I see the cogs more than the people. I see the tasks more than the hurts. I'm focused more on my to-do list than I am on the conversations in front of me. And I know for me, that is a way that I need to grow to be more like Jesus. Jesus didn't bypass people to do things. Jesus saw people because that's what he was here for. He came to disciple and to grow and to develop people to be more like him and closer to God. And as pastors and ministry leaders, that's exactly what we should be doing. We should be looking to see how we can become more like Jesus and live our lives in a way that reflects him more and more every day. And that's not comparing ourselves to other people, because when we compare ourselves to other people, they become that bar that we're trying to reach. But when we're trying to live more like Jesus, then everybody else pales in comparison, and we just try to live up to that. And part of it is we try to live up to this great pastor that we know or this great mentor that we have. We try to live up to that level in our minds, thinking that it is an easier bar to reach. Well, if I can just be like Pastor so-and-so, well, then that will be much easier than being like Jesus. But at the core, deep in our hearts, at the gut level, you and I both know that being more like Jesus is much easier than being more like those pastors, simply because It's who we are. We are called to be us. We are created to be us. And if I'm more like Jesus, then I am the best version of me that I can be. And that's much easier than trying to be somebody that I'm not. Early on in ministry, I felt like I had to be this hyper charismatic personality, hyper spiritual and hyper energy. And quite honestly, I'm not that. I'm not that guy. I am pretty chill for the most part. I'm the guy that sits back in a room of people. I sit back in my chair and I get my tea and I have a one-on-one conversation with another person. Or I'm the guy who walks into a room and instead of taking over, I just kind of work my way into the mix. I'm not hyper charismatic. I'm not super engaging most of the time. And so coming into this calling of ministry, I say, God, I don't think you've called the right person because I'm not what I see up on stage. When I look at pastors behind the pulpit, I don't see me. I see people that I will never be like. And then along came a pastor mentor of mine, and he was the same way. Not hyper charismatic, not hyper energy, none of those things. Yet he was a powerful spiritual leader that people looked up to, people listened to, people followed, and he effectively led his church in a way that was awe-inspiring to me. And that's when I realized I didn't have to be like every other pastor that I had seen up until then. And I didn't have to be like him either. I just had to be me and allow God to use the gifts and talents he's given me. Allow them to flow through. Allow them to be my ministry. Allow them to come out and just be the best version of me. And that's when things changed for me. That's when I stopped trying to compare myself to other people and I started to say, okay, God, how can I be the best me that I can? And I want to challenge you today. Are you asking that question? Are you asking the question how you can be the best version of you? Are you that today? If you're answering this question today, you're sitting here, you're listening to this, you're watching this, are you the best version of you today that you can be? Or have you allowed all these other things and all these other pastors and churches and your struggles in ministry, have you allowed all those things to bring you down to where you're at a point where you're just low and you question yourself and you second guess yourself and you're unsure of yourself and you're saying, I can never be like fill in the blank, or our church could never reach to the point of fill in the blank. And we always caveat that with unless God does whatever. But at the core of who we are, the problem is with us questioning us, you questioning you, me questioning me. And so my question today is if you're not the best version of yourself right now, what is it that you need to do to become the best version of yourself? What do you need to do to become that person? Maybe not tomorrow, but what about in 6 months? What about in a year? How would that impact your spouse? How would that impact your kids? How would that impact your congregation and your community? A greater question is how happy do you think it would make Jesus to see you become the best version of yourself? Or more so, how much happier would you be if you were just working on becoming the best version of you? How would that change your life? How would that change your mentality, your mindset, how you stepped into the pulpit, how you prepared your sermons? How would that change the way you stepped into your devotional time or your prayer time? How would that change the way you interact with people in your community? How would that change you knowing that you were the best version of yourself today? Now, even though it's going to take time to get there, there are things you can do today to become the best version of yourself. And the question is, where are the gaps? What is it that's happening in your life? Or what behaviors or decisions or habits have you developed in your own life that are keeping you from being the best version of yourself? Maybe it's you need to spend a little more time in prayer today, or maybe you need to sit back and pull out a book and open it up and blow the dust off and get into reading something other than just the scriptures, or something other than just the bills that are coming across your desk. Maybe you need to choose a healthier option at lunchtime today. Or maybe you just need to go for a little jog or a long walk. I don't know. I don't know where you are. I don't know what the gap is. I don't know what God is calling you to, and I don't know what the best version of you looks like. And there's a good chance you don't either. But you do know how you can be better tomorrow than you are today. And if you make a decision today that's going to change who you are, well, it'll reflect tomorrow. And then decisions tomorrow will reflect the next day, and then the next day. And before you know it, you're 2, 3, 6 months down the road, and people are asking, what are you doing different? Or they're looking at you and saying, I don't know what it is, but there's just something different about you. And that's when you know you're becoming the best version of you. And that's exactly what you want. You want to be the best version of you. You don't want to be so-and-so. You don't want to be pastor or whatever. You want to be the best version of you, because that's who you're created to be. That's who God designed you to be. And that's who He wants you to be. He wants you to be you. Only the best version of you. And so when you go to a pastor's conference, or you're hanging out at a pastor's luncheon, and they're asking the questions about how big your church is, or they're asking the questions about what ministries you're launching, you don't have to feel bad about whatever the answers are. And you don't have to feel like you have to one-up them with their answers, because you will be secure in who you are as a pastor, as a person, as a disciple of Christ. And you will know whatever your answers are irrelevant, because they have no value to you, because you are who God's called you to be, and you're leading your church and you're pastoring the way God's called you to. And you can't compare those things to other people's, other pastors, other churches, because that's just not how God works. And you can hold your head high and field those questions and have a big smile on your face, because inside you're going to know these questions are dumb and they don't matter. And I don't have to measure myself against those questions. That's my hope for you. My hope for you is that you can live this life being the best version of you. That's all we can ask of any of us, is to just be the best versions of ourselves. And I hope that's your case. I hope that's where you start today. I hope you make a decision today that will then create this pathway for you to start following to become the best version of yourself. That's my hope for you. It starts today. Make just one decision differently today than you did yesterday, and you'll be on your way. All right? Hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for being here on this episode of the Pastors Growing Church Community Podcast, and I will see you very soon.